Top 10 U.S. states black people should never set foot in due to deportation rates. 4 times higher. You might think that danger for black people in America only exists in rundown neighborhoods or far-off, unfamiliar places. But the truth is far more chilling. There are states where just one wrong look, a name that doesn't sound right, or a hesitant answer during a traffic stop is enough to pull you into a silent deportation machine, one that no one warns you about. Welcome to BLK Lens. In today's video, we're diving into something that every black immigrant needs to know before stepping foot into certain places. The top 10 U.S. states black people should never set foot in due to deportation rates 4 times higher than average. This isn't just a theoretical warning. It's the lived reality of thousands of black immigrants where valid paperwork doesn't protect you from suspicion, and a routine traffic stop can spiral into a chain of events that ends with you disappearing from the country. From deeply embedded ICE police partnerships to laws like SB 4, HB 87, or sweeping initiatives like Operation Lone Star, these states aren't just enforcing borders, they're regulating existence. If you've always pictured Texas as the land of BBQ and cowboys, or Florida as a sunny paradise, prepare to see them in a whole new light. This video will walk you through each state, not just through cold numbers, but through lived experience, quiet details, and everyday moments that might make you think twice before booking your next trip. So if you're a black immigrant living in the U.S., or simply someone who wants to understand the unsettling truth behind the curtain of freedom and opportunity, this is the video you need to see. Stay with us until the end, because some of the names on this list will absolutely surprise you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss content that actually matters. Now, let's get into it. 1. Texas. There are places that don't need fences to draw a boundary. Just the way people look at you like you don't belong is enough. For many black immigrants, Texas isn't the promised land. It's more like a tightly wound atmosphere where one misstep could turn you into a problem to be handled. No notice, no warning. Texas has long carried the unofficial title of America's deportation capital. But it's not just about geography or proximity to Mexico. It's about how the entire system seems engineered to always be ready to push someone out. Many black individuals have shared how they've grown used to being watched more closely when they walk into a store, being asked for papers during a highway stop, or simply being denied housing with no explanation. In Texas, these aren't isolated incidents, they're part of the air. This isn't just about statistics, but if you pay attention, they whisper the bigger picture. In less than 2 decades, over 500,000 people were deported through ICE field offices in Texas. 500,000 names vanished. No headlines, no closure, just gone. What makes this more unnerving is how seamlessly immigration enforcement blends into daily policing. Dozens of local police departments across Texas now operate with powers resembling federal immigration agents. Through the 287G program, nearly 93 agencies in the state can identify and detain those deemed removable. And while that may sound procedural, it takes on a different meaning when your skin color or accent makes you more likely to be stopped. There are countless cases where black immigrants fully documented were held simply because they didn't look American enough. An unfamiliar name, a slightly different accent, or even just silence during questioning can become grounds for suspicion. Then there's Operation Lone Star, a multi-billion-dollar initiative that mobilized state troopers and even the National Guard in the name of border security. But in practice, it meant more checkpoints, more ID demands, more quiet fear in the hearts of those just trying to go about their day. It blurred the line between immigration enforcement and daily life, bringing that scrutiny right into the center of cities. In 2023, Texas passed Senate Bill 4, a law that would allow state and local police to arrest individuals suspected of entering the U.S. illegally. It gave sweeping power without clear boundaries. Though a federal appeals court blocked it in July 2025, its very existence and the support it garnered speaks volumes. In Texas, immigration isn't a process, it's a shadow. Anyone could be caught in its cast. And beneath all the laws, figures, and policies lies something harder to quantify: the constant feeling of being under watch. For black immigrants in Texas, it's not about breaking a law, it's about always being on the edge of suspicion. So Texas isn't just a state, it's a mechanism, one where deportation isn't just the act of removing someone, it's the reflex of a system trained to do exactly that. 2. Florida. There are places where the word cooperation sounds harmless until you realize it's the beginning of a quiet machine that can pull you under just for breathing the wrong way during a traffic stop. Florida doesn't need to be a border state to make immigrants uneasy. What's unnerving here isn't the physical line between nations, it's the dense network of connections where local police and federal forces share a single goal: to search, to filter, and to remove those deemed unfit to stay. And for many Black immigrants, fit to stay doesn't always mean what's on your paperwork. It can mean how you walk, the name you carry, or the color of your skin. In reality, every one of Florida's 67 county sheriff's offices participates in the 287G program. That means anyone booked into jail, even for something minor, can be screened for immigration status and transferred to ICE custody. A small crack in the system can be the start of an entire life unraveling. Many Black individuals have shared that they're stopped more often than their white counterparts. It's not rare for Caribbean immigrants to be flagged simply because their names don't sound American. In those moments, it doesn't feel like you're living, it feels like you're being scanned. Then came Operation Tidal Wave, a campaign marketed by state officials as a massive sweep targeting people with criminal histories. But in the US, a record can begin with something as small as an outburst in a store, or a past mistake that's long been resolved. Between January and early May of 2025, more than 1,100 people were arrested under this initiative, a number that may not sound large on paper, but it signals something deeper. When enforcement finds a working model, it's likely to be replicated, and Florida is proving to be the perfect prototype. But even without large-scale raids, the risks are already sharp enough. Since July 2023, private businesses with 25 or more employees in Florida have been required to use E-Verify to confirm immigration status. That means a single missing document or one mistake in the system can cost someone their job, their home, and their chance to stay afloat. You don't have to be a criminal to be removed. You just have to exist in a system where every point of contact turns into data, and that data rarely works in your favor. Florida is becoming the embodiment of a sleek but cold enforcement model, a place where government cooperation is no longer about protecting communities, but about sorting who deserves to remain and who doesn't. For Black immigrants, especially those from the Caribbean, the name Florida carries a tension between hope and hazard. A sun-drenched state on the surface, but beneath it, a relentless sorting system where every step might be your last before a final check. Free Georgia. Some places aren't anywhere near a national border, yet somehow they make immigrants feel like they're living right on the edge between staying and being pushed out. Georgia is a prime example of that uneasy truth. There's a common belief that if a state doesn't share a border with Mexico, it must be less aggressive when it comes to immigration enforcement. But Georgia flips that idea on its head. As of mid-2025, nearly 2,900 people were being held in ICE detention across the state, more than in most places, trailing only giants like Texas, Louisiana, and California. But Georgia has no excuse of geography. Here, enforcement is not a response to location, it's a choice. Many Black immigrants say living in Georgia comes with a heightened sense of vulnerability, not just because of their skin tone, but because having a non-Anglo name or a different accent can suddenly mark you as foreign, and Georgia has all the tools to turn suspicion into action. One of them is HB 87, a law passed back in 2011 that allows law enforcement to check the immigration status of anyone arrested and requires many employers to verify work eligibility using E-Verify. While parts of the law have been blocked by the courts, status checks during arrests are still active today, functioning like a quiet filter behind every brush with the legal system. And Georgia didn't stop there. In 2025, it passed Senate Bill 21, which lets citizens sue local governments if they adopt sanctuary policies to protect undocumented residents. In other words, even if a city wants to offer protection, Georgia's laws are designed to shut that down. The message is clear: no safe zones here. Several counties, most notably Gwinnett, have long partnered with ICE through the 287G program, which empowers local officers to act as immigration agents. In practice, this means if you're pulled over or arrested for any reason, there's a real chance you'll be checked for immigration status, and if there's an issue, handed straight over to ICE. In Georgia, that possibility isn't remote. It's routine. Then there's Folkestone, home to the ICE processing center that's being expanded to nearly 3,000 beds, making it the largest detention site in the U.S. That growth isn't incidental, it's strategic. Georgia isn't just a waypoint in the system. It's becoming a destination for enforcement itself. For Black immigrants, especially those from Africa or the Caribbean, Georgia isn't just another southern state. It's a place where every encounter with the system carries a probability. And often, that probability has less to do with what you've done and more to do with who you're mistaken for. For Arizona. Some places don't draw the line on a map. They draw it in the way an officer looks at your face, listens to your voice, inspects your papers, waiting for something not to match. Arizona has long been seen as America's front porch in the fight against illegal immigration. But what few talk about is how that porch doesn't just face Mexico, it weighs heavily on the shoulders of those who don't look white, especially Black immigrants. Here, being asked about your immigration status doesn't have to start with suspicious behavior. Sometimes, simply not fitting the mold is enough. And in Arizona, that mold is dangerously elastic. In reality, Arizona accounts for nearly 1/5 of the entire nation's ICE detainee population, a staggering figure compared to its size. The Eloy and Florence detention centers run like revolving doors, as if there's always someone new to hold. Within that constant churn are Black immigrants, Haitians, Jamaicans, Africans, even U.S. citizens, mistakenly detained in an overwhelmed system. SB 1070, the infamous law passed in 2010, gave police the authority to demand proof of immigration status during any lawful stop if they had reasonable suspicion. Most of its provisions were struck down in 2012, but the one allowing officers to check status based on suspicion still lingers. And in practice, it's not hard to guess who gets suspected the most. It's not uncommon for a Black person with an unfamiliar accent to be pulled over in Tucson and asked not just for registration, but for proof of the right to remain in the country. With the presence of the Border Strike Force, a state-run operation funded with over $100 million, checkpoints, stops, and document sweeps have spread far beyond the literal border, creeping deep into neighborhoods, cities, lives. Proposition 314, passed more recently, extends the state's power to arrest and deport undocumented migrants. Though it's currently facing legal challenges, it signals a clear intent. Arizona won't wait on Washington, it will act on its own terms, even if that means fueling a steady anxiety among its communities of color. Many Black immigrants say that in Arizona, having your papers in order isn't enough, you also have to look legal. That unwritten burden makes Arizona more than just a policy hotspot. It turns the entire state into a zone of suspicion where the machinery of enforcement is always running, just waiting for a glance to set it into motion. 5. Alabama. Some places write their laws on paper, but others, like Alabama, etch them into how you're looked at when you cross the street, show your ID, or stay silent when asked a question that seems harmless on the surface. Alabama is known in the history of civil rights for its battlegrounds, but it also became one of the first states to try regulating the daily lives of undocumented immigrants through exclusionary law. HB 56, passed in 2011, wasn't just legislation. It was a blueprint for control, tracking immigrants from schools to homes to job sites. Though many of its harshest provisions were later struck down, its spirit lingers like a stain that won't quite wash out. As of mid-2025, Alabama still enforces two key parts of that law. Police officers can check immigration status during any lawful stop if they have reasonable suspicion, and all employers with 25 or more workers are required to use E-Verify to confirm legal work status. These may sound like routine administrative measures, but in practice, they open the door to unpredictable encounters, especially for Black immigrants. Many Black individuals have shared that in Alabama, suspicion doesn't just fall on people who speak another language, it often targets those who simply don't look the part. And in a system where not fitting in is casually equated with not belonging, the real danger lies not in the law itself, but in how it plays out in everyday life. While the shadow of HB 56 still hovers, new laws have quietly moved in. In 2025, Alabama passed SB 158 and HB 58. One strips foreign driver's licenses from the list of valid voter IDs. The other allows authorities to collect fingerprints and DNA samples from detained immigrants. On paper, these might look like efforts to align with federal enforcement goals, but for many people of color, they carry a chilling echo of old fears: being watched, tracked, and marked as separate. Back in 2011 and 2012, the economic backlash to HB 56 was immediate. Fields went unpicked, construction sites sat empty, and small businesses folded as undocumented workers fled the state. But rather than inspire reflection, that labor vacuum seemed to reinforce the mindset: enforcement over inclusion, suspicion over trust. For Black immigrants, Alabama is more than a state with limited opportunities. It's a place where you're expected to constantly prove your right to exist, not just with documents, but with behavior that attracts no attention, leaves no doubt. And in a state whose past never quite fades, that feeling isn't a rare occurrence, it's the quiet weight in the air. 6. Louisiana. There are places where the system doesn't need to raise its voice, because the way it moves is already enough to remind you. Here, your existence always feels like it's under quiet review. Louisiana isn't a densely populated state, yet when it comes to immigrant detention, it ranks near the top second only to Texas. What's chilling isn't just the number, an average of 6,900 detainees per day as of early 2025, but the way that number is sustained, quietly, almost effortlessly, as if built into the state's daily rhythm. Most ICE detention centers in Louisiana are tucked away in rural pockets, places far from legal help, hard to access, and even harder to be heard from. Names like Wynn or Richwood may not ring bells for most Americans, but they hold thousands, largely in privately run facilities contracted by the government. And when detention becomes a service, the people being held become a form of stable supply. None. Many Black immigrants have shared the feeling that living in Louisiana means walking carefully, not just to avoid misunderstandings, but because if you're detained, you might disappear into a place with no name, no lawyer, and no clear end in sight. New Orleans, once celebrated as the cultural capital of the South, is now a hotspot for removals. In just June 2025 alone, ICE's New Orleans field office reported over 2,000 arrests. These numbers don't make headlines, but they flow steadily, like an underground current beneath the city. Louisiana has 10 agreements with local sheriff's offices, including 2 87G programs that allow local law enforcement to act in federal capacity. Through intergovernmental service agreements, these partnerships are not makeshift, they're structured and built to last. What makes Louisiana especially risky for Black immigrants is the collision of three factors: a massive detention infrastructure, tight coordination between police and ICE, and the absence of strong media or public accountability. In long stretches of rural territory, it's not uncommon for someone to be held and transferred without their family ever being notified. And when disappearing stops being a metaphor, the fear of being targeted becomes something tangible. Independent reports have raised alarms about racial profiling during stops and checks across Louisiana. But the paradox is stark. The fewer people who hear about it, the smoother the system runs. Like a machine that needs no spotlight, only silence. 7. South Carolina. Some states don't need new laws to feel risky. All it takes is a few persistent mechanisms and a long silence for entire communities to move slower, speak softer, and tread more carefully. South Carolina isn't loud about its immigration policies, but that doesn't mean it's safer. In fact, what's unfolding here feels more like a quiet web one, where every traffic stop, every sideways glance, can trigger a process that's hard to escape. Many Black immigrants have shared that in South Carolina, the feeling of being randomly selected while driving isn't random at all, it's routine. Since early 2025, monthly ICE arrests have tripled in the state. That statistic may not make national news, but it's loud enough to change how people live their daily lives. The 287G program in South Carolina isn't new. Counties like York have maintained partnerships with ICE since as far back as 2007. And those agreements are still very much alive, meaning local police can act as extensions of federal immigration enforcement. Once that line is blurred, a simple traffic violation doesn't just end with a citation, it can become a doorway to detention. SB 20, passed in 2011 and modeled after Arizona's infamous SB 1070, once allowed officers to check immigration documents whenever they had reasonable suspicion. Although major parts of the law were blocked by a federal appeals court in 2023, the mandate for E-Verify remains. That quiet holdover means anyone applying for a job must be ready to be scrutinized, because suspicion, here, doesn't need to be spoken aloud to do its work. Studies like the one conducted by USC in 2020 have made it clear racial disparities in South Carolina's traffic stops are real and measurable. And for Black immigrants, that means every small moment running a yellow light, missing a turn signal, can lead to a series of questions with no obvious end. South Carolina doesn't need to loudly declare who it targets. It simply keeps the systems in place and lets time normalize them. For Black immigrants, the danger isn't in what you've done wrong. It's in the little things that don't seem to matter until they do, in an environment built to question you first. 8. Tennessee. Some places start out as waypoints, quiet, seemingly neutral, but over time, through steady, silent alignment, they become powerful gears in a larger machine. Tennessee is following that path. It's not loud, it's not on the border, but it's quickly becoming a serious player in the country's immigration enforcement network. As of mid-2025, the number of people held in ICE custody across Tennessee ranges between 1,000 and 2,000. That may not seem extreme at first glance, but the acceleration in enforcement is what stands out. Nashville, known to most as America's music capital, is now becoming familiar with ICE operations happening with unsettling regularity. Over 100 people were detained there in May alone. Many Black immigrants share a growing feeling that Tennessee is shifting into a state where your presence is no longer viewed neutrally. A different accent, an unfamiliar name, even a pause in your response during a traffic stop, these can all be enough to get you pulled aside. To the system, it's called screening, but to the person living through it, it feels like sorting. Back in 2011, Tennessee passed HB 87, requiring public agencies to report a person's immigration status if anything appeared irregular. In 2025, the state doubled down with Senate Bill 21, allowing residents to sue any city that offers sanctuary protections and stripping local governments of their immunity. These legislative moves may sound procedural, but on the ground, they create a climate where cooperation with federal immigration authorities is no longer optional, it's expected. Detention facilities like Hamilton County Jail, with over 1,000 beds, and the Blount County Justice Center support these efforts by providing infrastructure that normalizes detention as part of day-to-day law enforcement. And once detention becomes routine, being touched by ICE stops being rare. There are growing reports of Black immigrants being held after simple traffic violations, then quickly transferred into federal custody. The real danger isn't always in the big, dramatic moments. It's in the small interactions where you expect to explain and move on, but instead find yourself trapped in a process designed to escalate quietly. Tennessee isn't often mentioned in national conversations about immigration. But sometimes, the most concerning places aren't the ones that attract the most attention. They're the ones that follow every rule, make no noise, and never ask, "Should we?" 9. North Carolina. Some places don't need to overhaul their system to become more dangerous. All they have to do is quietly expand what's already in place until what used to be alarming starts to feel routine. North Carolina is becoming a case study in that exact transformation. Many Black immigrants say they're no longer surprised when someone is detained for unclear documentation. What unsettles them now is how it happens quickly, smoothly, without noise, and with almost no room to push back. In counties like Alamance, Gaston, or Henderson, that feeling is familiar. These are places where the 287G program has been woven into daily law enforcement for years. By 2025, North Carolina had 19 law enforcement agencies participating in the program. And it's not just being maintained, it's growing, with new agreements signed in Johnston and Union counties. That means once someone is booked into jail, the likelihood of their file being transferred to ICE is almost a given. No dramatic moves, just paperwork. And someone can vanish into the federal system before anyone outside even knows. House Bill 10, which took effect in late 2024, mandates that sheriffs cooperate with ICE. It wasn't passed in response to a crisis, and it didn't follow a crime wave. It was simply the next step in formalizing enforcement. Senate Bill 153, though vetoed by Governor Josh Stein in June 2025, still signals a broader legislative push, one that leans toward expanding enforcement power, not limiting it. Meanwhile, arrests keep happening. In Kings Mountain, 28 people were detained for identity theft. In Charlotte, another 24 labeled as criminal aliens. These numbers might seem straightforward, but they reflect a broader process. Label, transfer, remove. There are countless stories of black immigrants pulled over for minor traffic issues and then asked to prove their immigration status, even if they've lived in the U.S. for years and have American-born children. Advocacy groups have long warned about racial profiling embedded in the counties that work with 287G. But the program keeps expanding, as if the risk to individuals is just collateral for a bigger, unseen efficiency. For those who carry two marks of suspicion, being immigrants and being Black North Carolina is no longer neutral ground. It's a place where administrative silence can lead to life-altering consequences. A place where cooperation stopped meaning voluntary a long time ago. 10 Mississippi. There are places where danger doesn't need flashing lights or handcuffs to feel real, where what hasn't happened yet whispers louder than what has. Mississippi is one of those places. A state where absence itself creates a quiet kind of tension. It's not at the top of deportation lists. You won't find it leading the country in ICE detentions. But what makes Mississippi unsettling is its direction, not loud, not fast, but unmistakably leaning into the same enforcement-heavy path we've seen elsewhere. Many black immigrants describe living in Mississippi as standing in a dimly lit room where someone hasn't turned the light on yet, but everyone knows the switch is there. No one's sure when it'll be flipped, but the presence of that switch changes everything. It changes how people move, speak, and even breathe. Back in 2025, the state proposed House Bill 1844, a measure that would have authorized DNA collection from anyone detained on immigration-related grounds. It didn't pass. But the fact that it was seriously considered already raised red flags, especially among communities historically over-policed, like black immigrants, who've seen data and surveillance used not for safety but for control. There was another proposal, nicknamed the Bounty Hunter Bill, aiming to impose harsh penalties on people who re-enter after deportation. It also failed to pass. But that doesn't make it disappear. It lingers in the political air, like smoke from a fire that's no longer burning, but hasn't been put out. As of mid-2025, Mississippi has only a few known 287G agreements, and official records don't list specific sheriff departments. But those watching national trends say the warning signs are all there. The slow rollout of local cooperation, the push for stricter laws, and the silence from leadership, it's all part of a familiar playbook. In reality, Mississippi doesn't need large-scale ICE raids or massive detention centers to feel heavy. The mere potential for these laws to come back, to be passed next time, creates enough of a chilling effect. Many black immigrants say they've learned to stay quiet, to keep documents in order, to avoid attention not because of something that's happened, but because of what might happen tomorrow. And that's the real story here. Mississippi shows us that fear isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet. It sits in proposed bills and unspoken policies, in sheriff's offices, with no official press releases but plenty of questions. It exists in places where the system hasn't fully closed in, but the walls feel like they're inching closer by the day. For black immigrants, Mississippi is a reminder that danger doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes, it wears a maybe. And maybe is more than enough to make people think twice before stepping across a border, especially when that border is invisible but everywhere. And that wraps up the list of the top 10 U.S. states that black immigrants may want to think twice about before setting foot in. Every journey is deeply personal, but knowing the social landscape, especially the hidden risks tied to deportation, random document checks, or ICE collaborations with local authorities, can help you travel farther, safer, and with greater confidence. This video isn't meant to spread fear or discourage exploration across the U.S. Its purpose is to equip you with knowledge, the kind that rarely makes headlines but quietly shapes the daily lives of entire communities. If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay connected with more conversations around sensitive but necessary topics like this one. And if you've lived in, visited, or had any personal experience in any of the states we mentioned, please share your story in the comments below. It's through real voices like yours that we begin to understand America, not just as a map, but as a feeling of being welcomed or not. Thanks for watching, and as always, travel with open eyes and a protected heart.